We can't show you the full horror of this scene. The floors covered with bodies, blood and limbs. But there's no way to escape the carnage for these Palestinian families. As one woman prays to God, a young girl faints. Next to them, an elderly man, covered in dust, sits mute in his chair.
They bombed them while they were praying. They bombed them suddenly, without any warning. They've broken my heart. They've broken my heart.
They carry away the dead, scrabbling through the debris with their bare hands, searching for anyone still trapped. Israeli forces insist they use precision munitions to strike a gathering of Hamas fighters they say had been based in the prayer room of this school at dawn. But thousands of displaced Palestinians were sheltering here. Rescue officials say they found around 100 bodies. I ask God to enter heartbreak into their hearts as they've entered it into ours, screams this woman. Israel has carried out well over a dozen similar strikes on schools over the past month. It's a tactic that's intensifying and that has been condemned by the United Nations. This latest attack, the deadliest yet. The scene at the Al Ali hospital looks like a horror film. Patients lie on the floor. There's nowhere near enough beds. Outside in the courtyard, rows of bodies. Palestinians describe this as a massacre. The Israeli army disputes the death toll, claiming 20 Hamas fighters were targeted, something the group denies. Amongst survivors, anger leveled in all directions. We were performing the dawn prayer when the missiles hit, this woman says. My great-grandson was martyred, so was my husband and my son. May God curse the Arab nations for abandoning us, even before he curses the Jews. Even as they mourn, the sound of an Israeli drone above. A constant presence, a reminder of the constant threat. Drowning out the words of a mother saying a final goodbye to her beloved son.
And Secunder joins us now live in Tel Aviv. Secunder.
Well, Matt, there's been some strong international reaction to this Israeli strike. The EU's foreign policy chief saying that there was no justification for it. David Lammy, Britain's foreign secretary, saying he was appalled by the loss of life. But there is often, it appears, something of a gap between critical language and policy. And of course, in any case, Israel's firmest, strongest, most important ally is America. The US just the other day announcing that it was going to be releasing $3.5 billion worth of long-term military funding to Israel that had been approved by Congress earlier this year. Israel, for its part, accuses, as you say, Hamas of hiding behind the civilian population. Hamas denies that, but even if we assume in some instances it is true, you're left wondering where Gaza's ordinary people, the ordinary families are left to go that is safe, given that practically the entire population has already been forced to flee their homes. And one final point, I think today's bloodshed will make efforts to rekindle negotiations on a ceasefire in Gaza that it's hoped could begin again next week, all the more difficult.
Secunder in Tel Aviv, thanks very much indeed. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to the Israeli right-hand activist Gerson Bashkin, who has in the past negotiated hostage deals between Israel and Hamas. And I began by asking him whether Benjamin Netanyahu cares about Israel's isolation from its allies.
It doesn't seem to care. Israel just keeps on going on, doing whatever it wants, and has pretty much impunity. We are being increasingly isolated in the world. And as we're waiting for the attack from Lebanon and from Iran, Israel's airspace is being cut off from the world as we see more and more international airlines ceasing their flights to Israel. That's mainly because of the impending attack. We'll see if this has any lasting political effect.
Let's get first of all to this, appalling attack overnight against a school in Gaza City. It seems to me that every time we are edging closer towards some kind of deal, ceasefire for hostages, that something terrible happens.
The problem with the question is that I don't see Israel moving closer and closer to a deal. A deal has been on the table for quite some time. A deal could have been reached almost from the beginning of the war. But Netanyahu has refused to accept a deal. He refuses to accept the demands of Hamas, which one might be able to understand that Israel doesn't want to surrender after the horrendous atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. And that would be fine, perhaps, if we didn't still have 115 Israeli hostages in Gaza, amongst them young women, children, elderly people, sick and wounded. There is no excuse, from my point of view, of the prime minister not making a deal with Hamas and bringing them home. Well, Netanyahu keeps putting more conditions on the table and red lines, and the massacre that we saw in Gaza overnight is just another example of continuing on with the war without thinking about the longer-term consequences for Israel, and certainly not caring anything about the Palestinian people.
Right, and do you think that he wants to continue with the war, as has been charged by many people, because if the war is over, he might be out of power?
If the war is over, he has to be out of power. There's a growing cry in this country for new elections. There's a demand from the public for an inquiry of investigation headed by a Supreme Court judge in Israel to determine the responsibility of Netanyahu and the military and the intelligence for the failures of October 7th and what led up to October 7th. And we've been experiencing now for 10 months a lack of governance on the part of the Netanyahu government, who simply are not doing their job.
That accusation leveled against one man, that for his own personal interests, he's trying to prolong the terrible suffering. That's one hell of an accusation, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think it is. And I'm not a lone wolf here. This is being said by the mainstream of Israeli society, by people on our mainstream news stations every day leveling this charge against Netanyahu, that he's putting members of his own government who resigned from Benny Gantz, the leader of the largest opposition party today, who said that he's putting his own personal political interest in front of those of the country. This is unheard of in a democratic society.
The political leader of Hamas was assassinated, we presume, by the Israelis, although they haven't fessed up to it. The hardliner, Yahya Sinwar, the military leader of Hamas in Gaza, is now the head of the organization. He apparently wants to continue the war as much as Netanyahu apparently does. So is that a sort of mirror image there?
There is a mirror image. Some talk about Siamese twins here in terms of their interest in continuing the war. But to be honest and fair, we really don't know what Yahya Sinwar wants. Everyone seems to be speaking in his name and thinking that they know what he wants, but actually we haven't heard anything from him.
You, like everyone else in the country, have been expecting some kind of retaliation from Tehran and possibly from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. It hasn't happened yet. Who in the region actually wants a wider war?
It's difficult for me to imagine that anyone would want a wider war. There are no winners. There are only losers. Everyone loses. The economy loses. People lose their lives and property. Look at the horrific damage in the Gaza Strip after October 7th. Gaza is destroyed. 2 million people homeless. We cannot afford these kind of wars, and we cannot morally accept them. We have crossed too many moral lines here, and we need to be pulled back.
Gershon Baskin, thank you very much as ever.
Thank you.